Hello and welcome to this special edition of The Big Fight. We are now several weeks into a standoff with China on the border between India and China, actually in a territory which is part of Bhutan, one of India's closest allies, a country that asked India for its help. India went in, gave that help, and since then there's been a standoff with China with language that is increasingly becoming more and more belligerent, and I have to say particularly from the Chinese side. The Indian side so far has been rather measured. TV channels, of course, not necessarily the case, but then those are private TV channels. In the Chinese case, even newspapers with some association and linkage to the Chinese government, like Global Times, have been taking a really, really strong and a belligerent stance. And I think this is an issue that deserves a lot of our attention. Here in India, we spend a lot of time, a lot of attention, a lot of TV space in various things where we are fighting with other Indians, and we spend a lot of attention in worrying about Pakistan, which is at the end of the day, a fairly small and insignificant country when it comes to India. Not enough time is spent on looking at China, looking at the challenge from China, and at times like this, the threat from China. And that's what we're going to try and now look at this individual issue and broaden it into trying to assess what we should be doing at a macro level with the question of China. Potentially the biggest threat that India has, certainly one of our largest trading partners also. So a challenger, a partner, a threat, an enemy. Where exactly does China stand? We've got some of the top China experts here also to tell us and to talk to us and to tell us what to do. Starting with Brahma Chelani, who's perhaps been writing more about China. Not just now, you've been writing about China, I think, extensively for a decade or more, and talking about the fact that we need to shift more of our attention to China. So Brahma, it's always great to have you with us. Manapabi, it's great to have you with us, Deputy Editor of The Print. Tenzin Sundu is a Tibetan writer, activist, would be perhaps more concerned about everything that China is doing than just about anybody else I can think of, has also been talking to us at great length about what we should be doing with China. Major General G.D. Bakshi, great to have you with us as well. He's got some strong views on how we should be handling our foreign policy. Joining us from Hong Kong, Andrew Leung, who's a China specialist and a China expert and chairman, of course, of Andrew Leung International Consultants Limited. Andrew, it's a pleasure to have you with us. And Gaurav Chatterjee is joining us from Mumbai. Slightly different take to what many of the China hawks are saying, and he says we need to have a more measured relationship with China. Thank you all so much for being with us. But before we go any further, attention is not just fixed on what's happening on that border, but also what is happening in Hamburg right now, where Prime Minister Modi is there, Xi is there, they had a handshake. Where is that going to go? Is there the possibility of ice breaking or conversations behind the scene happening there at the G20, which could help take things forward? So Sunetra Chaudhary now joins us from Hamburg to tell us the very latest of what's happening there.
Is India happy with its meeting with President Xi? Because the pictures look very positive. You said a range of issues. Do the range of issues, sir, include what's happening at the Tri-Junction?
Well, the range of issues does include range of issues. So, I mean, I leave it to you to draw your conclusions.
But you're not denying it.
And, well, I'm not commenting on it because we have said what we have said. And as for the picture, you know the old dictum that a picture speaks more than 1,000 words.
Okay. Also, before I go any forward, we did get Vishnu Shom to help us to understand what exactly the issue is. Where is this particular part of Dhokla where this crisis has really originated, and what the stakes are for India? Here's Vishnu's special report.
In a clear indicator that New Delhi has no intention to give in to Chinese threats, the External Affairs Ministry has for the first time spelled out clearly why Indian soldiers, along with their Bhutanese counterparts, are deployed in a disputed area in Bhutan that China considers its own. In a detailed statement, the government has said that India is deeply concerned at the recent Chinese actions and has conveyed to the Chinese government that such construction of a road would represent a significant change of status quo with serious security implications for India. The standoff between India and China is south of the Chumbi Valley area in the Tri-Junction between India, Bhutan and China. The Dhokla Plateau is in Bhutan. It is here that there's been a standoff between Indian and Chinese soldiers. Just 40 kilometers north of the Dhokla Plateau is the Chinese town of Yadong, a town fully connected with an all-weather road. China's road construction workers attempted to extend the road from Yadong to this area. The bottom line, what is India's concern? A Chinese road to the Dhokla Plateau could mean that China could position artillery not too far from the Chicken's Neck, the narrow sliver of land that connects mainland India and the northeast. For now, both India and China are talking to each other,
China says the talks can only be meaningful if India withdraws its soldiers first. Vishnu Shom for NDTV.
Okay, let me now come to all of you. Let's just take a look at this particular crisis, and then I want to broaden it to looking at India-China relations and what our options are, can be, should be, what do we need to build up to. This particular crisis, why don't I start with you, because you've also been looking at it at a very micro level, what specifically is happening meadow to meadow out there. Tell us a little bit about this particular area and how you think this immediate crisis can be resolved.
So the thing about this area is very strategically important for us. We need
because
to
of its proximity to the giant chicken's neck and so on and so forth.
Not only that, the place where the conflict is currently taking place is of very great tactical importance to the army, because that's where our bunkers are, that's our defenses. If we do abandon that position, we open up not only that part, but the entire chicken neck up for oversight by the Chinese troops.
And if I can just add to that, right now in that particular area, the position of heights are all with India. The Chumbi Valley, which is where the Chinese are, is lower down. So it's very tough for them to actually attack India, as it were, from that particular point. If they get the advantage of heights and can build all-weather roads up into the heights, then that's really a major opening for China.
Exactly. That's the exact problem that has happened. They were trying to build an all-weather road up to those heights. We are of course disputing that they're right to do that, because that's in a disputed area. Both sides are not allowed to do more construction there, and that is the reason for this present conflict. So we do have our troops standing there, stopping the construction, not allowing the Chinese to proceed, and but we also have to understand it's not a confrontation on the classic side of like we have with Pakistan. There are no guns involved. There are troops standing face to face, blocking construction, but it's not aggression beyond that.
Okay, it's a standoff, not aggression beyond that. But if the Chinese continue to take the line, okay, it's not the Chinese government which is saying it, it's Chinese papers saying it, but they're saying withdraw or we will kick you out. And the danger of it becoming from a jostling to fisticuffs and, God forbid, to a shooting war, which has not actually happened on the border with China for a long, long time, that risk is always there, Brahma.
The full throttle campaign being waged by China against India is actually a psychological war that they're waging against India. And the psychological warfare extends from mounting daily threats against India to feeding disinformation to the media. So it's a propaganda war.
And just to take that up, are you surprised that India is not pushing back very hard on that propaganda war? Because the Chinese seem to be coming out with a full-fledged, all-out media assault that India is in the wrong, which India is not. But do you think the Indian government should be pushing back a bit?
It's a great question. Psychological warfare is integral to Chinese military strategy. They even employed psychological warfare in 1962 to paint themselves as the victim and India as the aggressor. So we shouldn't have been surprised by the fact that they are waging a psychological war against us. But what surprises me is that India has come out looking ill-prepared to counter the psychological war. For example, it took us, the Indians, 4.5 days to respond to China's non-stop propaganda from the moment they revealed this standoff on June 26th. We issued one statement on June 30th. That remains a sole statement.
And even after that, it's not that we are coming out with daily statements with the world press saying, look, we are not in the wrong. And the Chinese are going on, for example, saying India has crossed the line. The India-Chinese border in that particular part is demarcated. And yes, it is. We're not saying that the Chinese have intruded into Indian territory. We are saying the Chinese have intruded into Bhutanese territory, which they have done. And Bhutan asked us for help, and we are stepping in to help Bhutan. That very simple thing is something which many in the rest of the world may not be completely understanding.
Because the central issue that China is seeking to disguise is its intrusion into the territory of a tiny little state like Bhutan, one of the smallest countries in the world.
Which can't defend itself against Bhutan, which is why they've looked at India and saying, you better help us, because look what the Chinese are doing to us. And India has stepped in as it's treaty bound to do and as it's honor bound to do.
Exactly.
And we've taken the responsibility of Bhutan's defense. So we are coming to help a small, tiny neighbor with close links to India, which has asked for India's help. We're not actually saying that the Chinese have come into Indian territory.
No.
All right, Andrew, let me turn to you. You must have been reading about this particular crisis in particular and the sort of very bellicose language that's coming. A lot of people feel that India, China, given how much their trading relations are, given the stakes, it's not going to actually degenerate to a shooting war or to an escalation of tension. What would be your assessment? Is this the sort of a crisis that can go out of hand if you're not careful?
Well, let's face it. I mean, this issue of that particular area is very, very sensitive, as you pointed out, to India, and of course affecting Bhutan itself. But China is also fit into kind of historic events as far as is concerned. Now, both India and China, their powers, and then there is both sides cannot be full out war. Most of India's allies to choose don't want to take sides either. That's kind of situation. Now, I think the situation be managed from the view of finding common ground and also saying not on this, but first of all, managing, agreeing on code of conduct, the actual conduct. That's on the population side. But what is more important is the long-term relationship between India and China, focusing on areas to benefit. I'll explain what these benefits are later on.
All right. So I'll turn to you for that in just a couple of minutes. But Major General Bakshi, how would you look at the situation on the ground right now? How do you think it should be handled? And how can we, because obviously I don't think India can be seen as backing down in this case. It can certainly not allow, because in a sense, as we were just discussing, it's not even Indian territory, it's Bhutanese territory. Bhutan's asked India for help. We've gone inside, and for India to now back down and retreat and saying, all right, China, you can build an all-weather road up here, would be an act of surrender, I think, in many people's eyes. So how should the situation be handled?
The criticality of this piece of terrain, the Dhokla Plateau is just about 50 kilometers as the crow flies from the Siliguri corridor, the mouth of it is just 17 kilometers wide. All your east-west communications, all the communications to Arunachal Pradesh pass through this narrow neck. If you permit the Chinese to build that road, a class 40 road on the Dhokla Plateau, it would imply that they would be able to get their medium and their heavy artillery down to the tip of the plateau, down to the tri-junction. And that means they will be able to bring the Siliguri corridor under effective artillery shelling. Which in fact
as an army man,
the severance of the communications.
Yeah,
there is no way that you can back down.
I just wanted to ask you, are you finding some parallels in this? A lot of what you're saying, occupation of the heights, overlooking an important highway, not entirely that dissimilar to what Pakistan once tried in Kargil in 1999. Of course, there the roads are much closer. Here it's further away, but the concept is not entirely dissimilar.
Absolutely. You see, there they were trying to get the highway from Srinagar to Leh under the fire of direct firing weapons. Here they are trying to get it under artillery fire. We fought a full war to see that they wouldn't occupy that space, because we cannot permit such a situation. How can we have our east-west communications, the linkage between northeast India and the rest of India, hostage to Chinese artillery deployed at Dhokla? So the way, what I'm trying to highlight is there is no way that India can back down. The train, this is a core interest. The Chinese will have to understand this. The second point that I'm trying
India is going to back down is what Major General Bakshi is saying. Gaurav Chatterjee, let me get you in on this. What is your interpretation of what's happening, and how do you think it should be handled?
Foreign policy, especially with border issues, have to do with domestic policy, right? How a government wants to talk to its people. That's true all over the world for all governments. Which means the fact that this China-India kind of dispute is not getting the same press or mileage as the China-India-Pakistan dispute is for obvious reasons. It doesn't have too much domestic currency. There's nobody to feed this into. In that sense, you can feed a Indo-Pak thing. Now, if we come to the issue particularly here, what we are talking about here, all of us in the studio, is Bhutanese territory or Chinese territory based on who you agree with. Okay, so it is primarily a China-Bhutan bilateral. Okay. These areas are determined by an 1890 Sino-British or China-British kind of treaty, an agreement of sorts.
Hang on, can I just interrupt you? Because that's what the Chinese are saying. It's not entirely correct, because the Bhutanese and the Chinese, yes, India-China border in that area is demarcated. the Bhutanese Chinese territory has not been demarcated, and the status of the Dhokla Plateau has been a subject of some debate and discussion, and the subject of 24 rounds of talks and negotiations between the Bhutanese and the Chinese before the Chinese decide to march their bulldozers in an attempt to change what is the status quo by force. Well, they weren't using force directly on the Bhutanese, they were sending in their bulldozers. And Bhutan said you can't change what is status quo, which is a perfectly, I mean, that's the principle along the entire line of control out there, that don't change what status quo.
The Indian Army has put in a statement saying that no bulldozers were used. So this bulldozer thing is not true. Okay. But it's true that Indian postings were.
There are photographs of bulldozers.
Bulldozer pictures actually, but all right, fine. Let's leave
Indian
that.
Army has issued a clarification. Okay, no bulldozer were used.
Okay, fine.
And what's more important is that Bhutanese-Chinese bilateral talks have been going on for a very long time. China has been claiming that from 1890, the 1890 agreement determines that it is between China and Bhutan to decide. China is a sovereign state, Bhutan is a sovereign state.
No, hang on.
The problem...
Are you saying that India should abandon Bhutan to saying that, look, you better sort it out with China, it's got nothing to do with us?
But India cannot decide a China-Bhutan border.
No,
they are sovereign states.
Asked India for help. India has, Bhutanese security has always been something which India has taken the responsibility of. It's there by treaty. IMTRAT has been there in Bhutan for a long time. The defense of Bhutan is almost an Indian obligation, and if Bhutan asks India for help and assistance in standing up to China, how can India say, well, it's between you and China, tum log sort out kar lo, hum log ghar ja rahe hain? How can India say that?
If it's a border dispute between sovereign states, you cannot have a third party kind of doing this.
Unless
for example, Bhutan is a separate UN member. Bhutan is not an Indian territory.
Britain and France went to Second World War with Nazi Germany because Germany invaded Poland. That's what happened, because
the results were not nice. Such wars, when big powers get involved on small territories, are terrible on people.
No, I get that. So you're saying basically India should tell Bhutan it's your problem, you deal with it, we should pull out.
Not really. India can, if it wants, its clout, it can advise Bhutan how to go about the agreement, how to go about the negotiations, and what India needs for its security interest, if I see as an Indian citizen, is to clearly demarcate all its interest borders with China, as simple as that.
Can I just say that if India completely backs down and leaves Bhutan to its fate right now, China may well use that as a signal about how strong India is and use that to force a solution on its own terms everywhere else across the border where it does affect us, including taking a tough position on Arunachal Pradesh, as they're showing signs of doing, demanding Tawang, Aksai Chin, everywhere. Once you show that you are weak, well, actually that's my theory, that when you show you're weak, possibly it rolls out elsewhere. Manu, would you agree with that?
I agree that, and also we have to understand that not only is the defense of Bhutan our responsibility, this directly affects India's security as well. It is the trajunction.
But the point that China is saying that this is not why you here, it's not your territory, it's right, but we are treaty bound and we are morally bound if Bhutan asks us for assistance to provide it.
Totally, we are both of those things, and in addition, we also have our own security to look at, because that area directly affects Indian defense interests.
Okay, but then let me just get you in on this point.
Right, the entire problem that it started now, it started from Tibet. When China first invaded Tibet, Indian former Prime Minister Pandit Nehruji thought that it is better for India in the long term to be friends with China. And when India abandoned the entire issue of Tibet, and how for thousands of years India and Tibet been together on the Himalayas, all across the Himalayas, is the Tibetans and India being together on the border. Now, because India abandoned Tibet at that time, and now India is facing all the problems from Arunachal right up to Ladakh. And problem today that we are facing at Doklam, or in Tibetan we say Doklam, is the Dokpa's path. Dokpas are the nomads. It's a pass for the nomads to pass through these areas. It started because China today is asserting their authority in that area, which is supposed to be a status quo, to maintain status quo between these two countries.
Okay.
So it is a border between Tibet and India. It's not China border.